For sure. And I think what happens, the third attribute of humility is accepting blame, accepting when you've made a mistake. Right. And so really one of the things I learned in this journey was through these characteristics. I use the expression, humility is your greatest weapon, particularly when you're dealing with team members. And
are you tired of working more for less profits in your home service business? What if I could show you $100,000 in hidden annual profits in your business in less than 3 minutes? Would you be interested? And not only show you where, but how to create that 100K in 6 months or less without additional advertising or marketing spend guaranteed. Just go to sharpenthespearcoaching.com to see how truly simple it is. That's sharpenthespearcoaching.com. Do it now. And we are back on STS, Sharpen the Spear podcast, with another incredible guest. I've got Jim Dubos. I've already forgotten, Jim. See how terrible I am? See how terrible that is?
Dubos.
Okay. Dubos, Jim Dubos. I shouldn't look at it when I try to pronounce it. That's the problem. But that's why we're real here. We're just on the fly, no editing allowed. All right, Jim, with our usual STS tradition, no one knows Jim better than Jim. So Jim, bring us up to speed. Give us the backstory. I want to get into the conversation.
Sure. Well, look, thanks for having me on, Sharpen the Spear. I'm excited to be here. So the backstory on Jim is I'm a 35-year entrepreneur without a college degree. I can proudly say that.
You and me both, brother.
I've had the blessing to start 10 companies. I've exited 7 of those companies through mergers and acquisitions. My last exit was in 2022. And so I decided after that exit was finished to spend a little time just thinking about how could I distill down 35 years of pain and suffering and anguish and success into something that people could consume. And really honestly just kind of stumbled upon this, this exit ready method that I call it. But I also stumbled upon 4 characteristics because my last company was my most fulfilling entrepreneurial journey of all my companies. And the reason it is because I stumbled upon these 4 personal pillars that I had to have as an entrepreneur in order to have my best self be there for both my customers and my employees. And those were gratitude, humility, teamwork, and servant leadership, the heart of a servant. And those 4 things combined with these 15, I'll call them business characteristics, really distilled into what is now the exit ready method. So I'm excited to be here and see where this goes, Richard, and share, the things that you think are interesting for your audience.
Yeah, I love it. And I know from my tiny bit of research I've done on you and the things you just said, we're very aligned in these aspects. So we're gonna go pretty deep on this stuff, which
awesome.
I think will be really, really helpful to the audience. Okay, because it's not that this is brand new. It's just people, and I've dealt with business. I've been in business myself 35 years, multiple companies. I've seen people they kind of do it. They don't get the whole picture. They pull a little piece and they try to implement that, and maybe they don't go all in and they struggle and they say, oh, that's garbage. They forget it is the whole that matters, right? And like the 4 things you put in place there, it's really important we grab a hold of this, because I talk about vision a lot and everything else and purpose and these things. And it's that singular approach that tends to make them fail. I don't know if you've experienced that.
I agree. And I think my dad, I'm the son of a carpenter. Okay. My father was a blue collar worker his whole life. And my dad kept things very simple. And I think, I'll use gratitude as an example of one of the pillars. And the way I describe gratitude is it's the attitude of appreciation under any circumstance. And gratitude, look, it's a muscle. You have to work the muscle or it's going to atrophy. And so this idea behind these personal characteristics, my dad used to say, you can't give someone else what you don't have. And so, there are lots of ways to express that, right? Lead by example, all these different things that we all kind of hear, but what do we actually do to put them into practice?
That's it.
And so, by just trying to really get focused and distilling them down to very specific things, whether it's working, because look, you've had multiple companies. Anyone listening knows entrepreneurship is hard. Okay, you don't go and start a business if you want the easy way.
Right. Right.
It is not the easy way. Okay, but by knowing that entrepreneurship is hard, you go, well, how do you find fulfillment in this journey? Right? How do I find fulfillment in doing what I'm doing and trying to make, this work? And that's really why I focused on these four pillars, because it's a way to kind of first internalize these things for yourself so that you can build fulfillment for yourself in doing what you're doing every day, while you're getting up every day. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think, again, I'm going to go back to what they perceive. There's a lot of books. There's a lot of podcasts. There's a lot of everything, a lot of videos, and a lot of all this stuff telling you how to do something. Okay. The problem is if you haven't put it into practice in yourself, in your own life, and the own things that surround you, it's not going to come across authentic when you try to implement it in a business, because you're really shooting in the dark, because you don't really know. Because once you experience something, that's what makes you, with every business that you built or exited, you became better because you did it. Right.
Well, if you think about in the exit ready side, what I focus on is basically building a company based upon these attributes or these characteristics, and fundamentally making the company non-dependent on you as the owner. Because that then creates an asset that is transferable. Because if the company is dependent on you solely for its existence, if you can't leave and things don't fall apart, you don't have a transferable asset, right? And you're miserable in the journey. And so this idea behind, first, okay, I've got to have these certain characteristics. I'll use humility as an example. It's one of those ones that people kind of seem to struggle with a little bit, because we don't really know how to deal with humility. And I tell people humility is really two simple things. Number one is being willing to say that you don't have all the answers, that you need help from someone else, and then having the ability to actively listen to others. If you can do those two things, you can operate as a humble entrepreneur.
It's one of my favorite definitions of humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less.
100%. I said it in one of my videos.
Yeah, well, and that took me a really long time to figure that out. Okay, because that was a whole lot about me for a really long time. Okay, that's kind of basically.
Look, I think entrepreneurs are naturally, one of the things I've learned is that entrepreneurs are naturally good at a lot of things. Okay, that's one of the characteristics of entrepreneurship, is that regardless of your chosen skill, your trade, your profession, you typically are good at a lot of things, which that's part of what makes you a really good entrepreneur. Okay, but it's also can be a little deceiving, because you can think that you don't need others, or you need to put on this persona of having all the answers, when the reality is you don't. And particularly if you have employees, people actually respect you more if you go, I'm not sure. Well, what do you think? Or let's go find someone who can give us the answer. All of a sudden now, you just opened up another whole, avenue. You're building trust, you're building transparency in your business, all different types of positive characteristics that don't sometimes come naturally to entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I had to start saying to myself, there absolutely has to be someone smarter than me at this, because it'd be a horrible if I'm the smartest guy, we got a problem. So I got to find someone who's a lot smarter, and the sooner the better. But in the beginning I didn't. I will do it. I'll get it done. I'll work a little harder. I'll work a little longer, and make this stuff happen. And you kind of do, but you're right. You get. And I think, Jim, it's because as an entrepreneur, we're a natural problem solver.
For sure.
Okay. So you can fix things. like all the time. So all of a sudden that becomes like your modus operandi. I'm the fixer, man. I'll come in. I'll take care of that. I'll take it. Well,
No
just do
question.
that. Just do
Yeah,
this, right? So
no question. You get into this mode of trying to have all the answers, right? Because and look, I think it comes from a naturally good place, because you don't want to let anyone down, particularly if you have team members, right? If you have employees who are working with you, you want to give the answer because you don't want to let anyone down, right? And so I think it comes naturally in most cases from a good place, but you also have to be willing to go, admit to yourself if you're not sure, right? That's the humble side of you, to say, you know what, I think I know the answer, but I want to go validate, and then have that list of people that you trust. I call them, your top 10 advisors, right? Have those people that are on my dad used to say, build your Rolodex, right? That's old school, right? But
yep,
have those
yep.
people in your Rolodex that you can pick up the phone and call when you need to validate something. Before you go do it, just go validate.
Yeah, it's your private board of advisors. They're trusted, they're respected, right? We get them. I think also when you're in that entrepreneurial role, there's a misconception in our own mind, because we're solving problems. We actually want to have the answer because we believe that's good leadership, right? We've been kind of trained thinking that, well, if I don't have the answer, why are they going to trust me? And so I got over that. I just think that's the thing. Whether the answer was right or wrong, I just gave it. Okay, well,
Look,
we'll do this.
for sure. And I think what happens, the third attribute of humility is accepting blame, accepting when you've made a mistake, right? And so really one of the things I learned in this journey was through these characteristics. I use the expression, humility is your greatest weapon, particularly when you're dealing with team members. And in a lot of my companies, I dealt with a lot of uber smart people, super smart people. And so I was able to engage in dialogue and really fundamentally help them elevate themselves, because I was willing to say I didn't know, or I was willing to say, I made a mistake. It didn't work the way I thought it was going to, right? Or I'm not sure, but I know who to ask. I know how to go get this answer, because you're creating an environment with your employees of transparency, trust, and then honestly, I'm going to say this word, which is crazy, vulnerability. You made it safe for the employee to be vulnerable, to say, I don't know the answer. I need to go ask Jim, and I need to be willing to tell him, I don't know. I don't know what to do here, right? Because I think a lot of times there's this fear factor that operates inside of companies, that people aren't willing to admit they don't know, or they're not willing to admit they made a mistake. And then what happens, right? Eventually it comes out, and it's 10 times worse the way it comes out than if they would have had an environment where they just were safe to be vulnerable and say, hey, I made a mistake, or hey, I don't know what to do here.
Plus, the problem would be fixed already.
Exactly.
Okay, so now you're just dragging out the misery.
Exactly.
And it's going to be compounded, like you said. I think you're exactly right. I think when you create that atmosphere, what we do, when we do like a strategic vision, we want to show every person on the team where they're the hero in the journey, right? In that whole process. And when they understand that, they're like, okay, well, this matters. What I do matters. Okay. But I also am open to like help the guy in front of me and the guy behind me. Right. We understand.
Yeah, look, you're touching on something. I use an expression, team, right? I use the word team. A lot of people correlate it to teamwork, but I say, no, I mean team, not staff. Distinctly different, right? Distinctly different, right? When you think about the word staff, how does it make you feel?
Owned.
Say the word team, right? Or say the word team, how does it make you feel? It makes you feel like you're a peer,
Yep.
right? Versus staff.
Contributor. Yep.
And so this concept of collaboration, this concept of peer respect and communication, willing to dialogue. I mean, look, if you're the entrepreneur owner, everybody knows you own the company. I mean, the practical reality is you are the boss. They know if, the buck stops with you. But if you want to get good feedback and collaboration and have people work on their own independently and do things the way you would do them, you got to build trust. You got to build, safe. It has to feel safe in the environment. right?
And
And that's one of the things that I learned, through this journey, was that they actually want to do their very best for you, but they
yes, they
want to
do.
feel like it's safe to do it.
The thing I think, Jim, is what people have to grab, what owners have to grab, entrepreneurs have to grab is if you can do exactly what you just described, guess what happens? They run your business. I mean, they make
100%.
everything happen and you get that freedom you went into business to get, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit of this exit ready, concept that I talk about, is that what you're doing is building this asset and all these different characteristics, and you're building the company to be able to operate without you. It's profitable, it's consistent, but now you have freedom. You may never want to sell your company, right? And which is great, right? But now it gives you freedom and options. God forbid you have a health incident and all of a sudden now I can't stay in my business. I have to exit. Well, guess what? Now you have an asset that has value that you can transfer, right?
Yeah,
That you
absolutely.
can,
Yeah.
and so it's really building this business that generates personal freedom, gives you fulfillment as an individual entrepreneur, and gives you options, quite frankly, along the way.
You know what I think's great about that, Jim, is touch on assets. I try to teach all my clients that every person on the team needs to be an asset, which means they're producing more than they're being paid, right? If they have an asset mindset, what are they bringing? Delivering more value than we're being paid for. We do that for our customers. This is worth 2 and 3 times what they're paying for it. That's why they buy it. 4 times as much. That's why they buy it, because of the value. We're doing the same thing inside the company. And to me, that makes my people free
Look,
because of what
I
they're
will
doing.
I will promise you 100%, whatever you measure, that's what your employees are going to manage. That's what they're going to manage to. Whatever you tell them are the measurements that matter to you as the owner, I promise you that's what they're going to focus on. So be careful what you measure. Be careful,
Good
because
point. Yeah.
and I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs who at times are frustrated because they don't feel like their people are spending their time wisely. They got 8 hours a day. Well, what are they spending their time on? I'm like, well, first question, what's your primary measurements? What are you asking them to keep track of? How do you measure their productivity? That's number one. Number two, have you ever done a time log? Do a time log. Do it for 3 days, 4 days. Tell them you want 15-minute increments, 30-minute increments. Write it down and review it and go and ask yourself, is that what I want them spending their time?
That's it. And
You know,
it's that level of accountability.
for sure.
But you having them do that work now with the paper and the pen, and that's how I would do it. I would not let them do it on a computer. I'd make them hand write that thing down in the
For sure.
notebook so it really connects, but they start seeing it, because I think it was salary.com did this huge study, and they found that the average employee wastes 2 hours per day. That's the average time that's wasted, whether that's phone stuff from doing. Now that's the average. So that means there's some people who do a lot more and some people do as much, but you're going, wow, that's some unaccounted for time. If you just had 5 employees, that's 10 hours a day. That's 50 hours a week. That's cool. That's a whole nother payroll.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So I love that. And when they get into that, and tell me if this is kind of your additional thought process on this. When you do a time study, okay, an activity log or whatever you want to call it, do you find like what you're training them to think this way, right? So the goal is to start having them think about, what they're actually bringing to the table.
Yeah, you said something earlier that I want to roll back before I answer that question, which is what I learned in my journey as my companies grew. How was I, the question I began to wrestle with was, how was I going to delegate and have confidence delegating roles and responsibilities inside of my company? And so I kind of dialed it down to this people, process, tools methodology. And people have to have fundamental responsibilities within the company. They have to understand clearly their role. They have to have obviously certain skills to execute those roles. And then you've got to have your primary outcomes that you expect. So if I'm whatever it is, let's just say I'm the controller. Well, what's my primary outcomes? Well, I want detailed financials. I want them accurate. I want them on time. You can come up with your primary deliverables, right? Well, by doing that, it allowed the individual employee to focus on, I know what my job is. I know what skills I need to have, and I know what my owner expects of me. And this is how he's going to measure me every month, every day, whatever the measurement period is, to know that I'm doing what I need to be doing. And so when I'm doing the activity log, I'm simply just asking the question, do you have those other things aligned? Does Betty or Sue or Joe or whoever you're measuring know their role? Is their role clearly defined? Do they understand the skills that you think they need in order to do that job? What's the outcome you're asking of them to deliver? And then how do you measure them to know that they're working towards those outcomes, whatever the period is? You do those 4 things, it's clear, right? But it took me 30 plus years to figure that stuff out, right?
And Jim, and that's why I'm sitting here smiling, because I'm like, yes and amen.
Yeah.
This is what I talk about. It's the same thing. It's like all of that. So I boil it down to a saying and go, what does success look like on the day, the week, the month, the quarter, and the year? If people know how to win, which are all the things you just described, okay, that we as owners have to build, right? We have to build that lane out completely, skills, everything, the competency levels, everything else. Then you can drop someone in there who understands what winning is, and guess what they can do? They can win every day. Because all those parameters have been set. Like you said, you're measuring the correct things.
And what happens to a lot of, it happened to me, right, in multiple cases before I finally figured out that I needed to do it differently in the last company, was I could not be the repository, all-knowing repository of knowledge, okay, on process and procedure and all the things that go on inside the business. And so what I learned was that over time, as the business grows, I have to remove myself as that repository, and I have to implement systems and tools that allow people, because think about it, right? When you need to onboard a new employee, how painful is that? Who's going to teach them? How are they going to learn all the different things that we do inside of the business? It hurts. Right? It hurts. Well, now there's software out right there. There's tools out there that allow you to streamline those things. Now, yes, do you have to put in the work on the front end to build the role in the tool? Yes. But the beauty of that is once it's done, now you're not having to reinvent the wheel every time you onboard a person into the employee community, right? And so it's some of those things that I think as owners, because I can distinctly remember times where I'd be walking down the hall and somebody would ask me something, and it was on a process, and I would answer the question, and somebody from another office would stick their head out and go, no, we changed that. It's this now. And I would be like, oh, yeah, you're right. And after about 4 or 5 times of that happening to me, I'd be like, Jim, you got to stop.
Yep.
You got to do this differently because the people are depending on your answers.
Right. I did that with my guys. I would tell people we build water features and stuff. So pretty soon I got them on their own. They're doing their whole thing, right? This took years. And I'd show up one day, I'd jump in the hole. I started helping them. And my foreman would be like, we don't do that right now. I'm like, okay, so I'll start doing something else. And he'd be like, Richard, we don't do that either right now. Okay. And I end up going, you want me just to go get lunch for you guys? They go, that'd be great. Please get out of the hole. You're wrecking things. Okay. So I know, it turns into that, which I love. That's what you want to hear. They've got the perfect system. They know how to do it. They're doing it. Like, okay, well, this is good. I'm just trying to lend a hand now. I'm a little more removed. I don't do it quite as much, but hey, you know what? The outcomes are always great with their system.
Look, there are 2 very expensive things that happen inside of companies, and we all know this as entrepreneurs. To acquire a client is probably the most expensive thing that we all do. And the second most expensive thing is to have to hire or replace an employee. Those 2 things, right? And so you're constantly, as an owner, you should be thinking about those 2 things and going, all right, how do I take advantage and how do I maximize my efficiency so that I don't have to do those things or make it easier on myself when I'm doing those things?
Yeah, we always say, that the 2 things you're doing in business is get clients, keep clients. Well, it's the same thing with people who work for you. Is get people, keep people.
Well,
It's retention that we all struggle with. Hiring people, that's a sales job. Okay, I
yeah,
just got to
look,
sell the whole thing, right?
yeah, look, I mean, I learned in my last company, I think it probably got distilled down the best was having a, I'm going to use an expression, having a very employee centric mentality. Richard Branson, I love his expression. He says, take care of your employees because they take care of your customers. And it's something that my own experience taught me that was really accurate. And we had very, very low churn on our employee community, and we had very low churn in our customers. I think because employees cared, they were locked in on the company, and then in turn they locked in on our customers.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, that is the goal. I mean, if people want to say that what you just described is the goal. When you have a business, who doesn't want their employees caring about the company and taking care of the customers and clients at the highest level?
100. My dad would say, "Look, if you want people to care, then you need to care for them."
Right.
It's not. This is not complicated science here. Okay, and I think that's where these four attributes individually. So if you want to feel fulfilled and you want to feel like you're building something that gives you meaning and purpose, well, these four things, first you have to internalize them, but then you turn back around and you express them onto your employee community. And when you do that, people go, Joe, John, Jim, he's sincere. He cares, and look, we all know if you've employed people, life is going to happen. It could be death, could be divorce, could be, whatever, right? And you are going to have those moments where how you handle those moments. And trust me, the employee community is watching.
Yeah.
They are paying attention. And the way you manage through those life experiences as the employee community, sees that employee go through them, it matters. And if you handle them well, people respond in a tremendously positive way. And that's going to pay huge dividends in your company.
Yeah. This is what you're describing is what they call company culture, right? So a lot of people will say you need a better company culture. Of course, they can't tell you the first thing to do or change or anything else, right? So, and it's a difficult thing when you've had a business for a certain amount of time, whatever, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, to like, oh, my culture's bad. And a lot of companies are. Well, now what do we do? Like, it's the changing of the culture that is
So look,
super difficult.
I actually think it comes from the owners.
Absolutely.
Fundamentally, you cannot, as an owner, you can't go to your managers and go, our culture sucks. You guys need to change it. It's not going to work.
You just need a mirror.
You need
All you need
to,
is a mirror.
right. You need to say, if you want your culture to change, you need to first internalize and say, what do I want to change? What don't I like? Right? What do I see that's happening that I don't like? What do I need to change? Well, then you need to ask yourself, well, if you're sitting in the employee's shoes, how what do you need to hear? And what do you need to see? My dad used to express to me that, it's not what you say, it's what you do.
That's right.
And people will go, okay, well, yeah, Jim just came in and said we're gonna do that this way because he wants to change culture. Okay, great. I said it, but how did I back it up? What did I do? I'll give you an example. So we had grown. We had almost 125 employees in the company at this time, and I felt like there was an element of there were so many people that you can't talk to everybody every day, right? And there's businesses, a lot of millions of dollars. You're just trying you're just trying to hang on. And so I realized this. I was like, if I don't make myself available in some way, shape, or form, we're going to have a cultural challenge. People are going to feel like there's an ivory tower in the company, and we need to fix this. And so I did something really simple. I said, we're going to have a monthly lunch where the whole company is going to get together. And when we did that, I would make it a point to have people from different departments that I would not normally see in my daily interactions, and that I would sit with them. And I would ask them to bring me something that challenges you during your day. Bring me something that you really like about the company, and then bring me a solution to the challenge that you think we might be able to do. And I did that for a year. It was basically just having lunch. It was simple. But because in one of the other things that we did at this lunch is we forced people who didn't normally work together to sit with each other.
Yeah.
And said, okay, well, sales, you can't just sit with other salespeople. You got to go sit with customer service. Or you got to go sit with accounting, or you got to go sit with, whatever, right? Whatever the group was, manufacturing. You got wherever you got to go. And it created this personal kind of human, I'm going to use that word, maybe human connection with the employee community, so that when COVID hit, this was before COVID, so that when COVID hit and we all had to go home, 95% of the company went home, we stayed connected. We actually doubled the size of our company during COVID from a revenue and employee community. We hired people. We grew. But the reason I think we survived and sustained the company and actually grew the company was because we had put all that work in to being very connected and authentic, and built a really solid culture. You said culture. I have to share this with you. What started out as a recruitment program, and it was come be awesome, and it was hashtag come be awesome. And so that was so when we would, recruit, we would recruit people under this hashtag come be awesome. Well, internally, this developed into hashtag we did awesome. So that when we had a successful, maybe we'd had a sales transaction, or we executed well, or a delivery, or whatever we were doing, it was a way to people kind of internally say, hey, we executed well. Well, we took hashtag come be awesome, and we turned it into an employee voted annual award.
Love it.
And so, we had annual awards. We had departmental awards that each department head would put someone up for their annual award. And we had the MVP award where it was the ownership selected someone that we felt like was the most valuable player, But the hashtag come be awesome was the pinnacle award, and it was employee voted. Everybody got voted once. And your picture got put on a wall in the company, and so we had this wall of hashtag come be awesome, recipients. And it was a tremendous, culturally, it just built a phenomenal team environment, because people they were genuine, they cared about each other. Yeah. And like I said, when COVID hit, we didn't really miss a beat from an employee community standpoint.
Yeah, that's so good. I was working with a manufacturing company, and there's a guy who started a program called Craftsmen with Character. And he'd work with these high school students, right? And he wants to get them in the trades and the service stuff, right? So doing it about 10 years, got full programs, a couple, schools are starting to pick it up. Then the Navy found out about it. And the Navy's like, we need this to happen. They dropped millions on this guy, now it's in all these places. But the cool thing he was doing, he's from my area. He'd take these kids and he'd find a business, and they go each week, and they spend a couple hours, and they'd be in every department. They would spend 2 hours in every department of the company just to get a hands-on, what does this look like? And then they had this thing back at school, and they talk about it, and they talk about integrity and character and all. And he had this whole program, really cool. So I'm watching this, and my client is the manufacturer in this particular place. Like, why don't we do that with all the employees? Do they know everything? Do they spend 2 hours a week in a different place? He's like, that's a really good idea. He started doing that. It's amazing. Yeah. They go sit 2 hours in the sales room where these guys are moving this product they're building. They're like, oh, I don't want that job.
Yeah, well, and that's a little bit what would happen at lunch, right? Because the goal was to have basically a cross-pollination of experiences. So if I'm a customer service person and I'm sitting across from one of the salespeople, and I go, well, let me explain to you, when you sell something, this is what happens to me.
Right, right.
Right. So then all of a sudden, so now you have this exchange of experiences. So now people can, so when they go back to their job and they go execute their functional role in the company, they at least have an appreciation for what's going to
Well,
take place, as
yeah,
they're executing their daily role.
yeah, I think what that does is, and I love the immersion of that, whether it's just 2 hours a week, and everyone, it's production, right? It starts here and goes all the way to that. And you got 35 people on the floor building this, going for the same outcome, right? So we started looking at that, like, that's why we cross train front and back. Then we understand what everyone does, because now when you're doing your specific task, you are actually thinking of the next person. What are they going to be having to work with? If I don't get this part done correctly, they're going to either send it back, do this, they can't perform. So again, from a cultural standpoint inside the business, people start caring, because everyone tends to get in their own silo. I just make this. I don't care where this goes. I just got to get out 37 of these today.
For sure. Yeah. Look, I think, the fourth attribute or principle that I talk about is, I use the word servant, right? Robert Greenleaf wrote Servant Leadership, right? The different theses on servant leadership. And it's really the simplest way I can describe what I tried to instill, particularly in the management team, is, turn it upside down. You're at the bottom, they're at the top. What do they need to go do their job? Another way to express it is, the team gets all the glory, I get all the blame. Just taking a very servant, humble approach to the management of your team. Now, look, that doesn't mean we don't hold people accountable. Every employee is accountable for execution. You don't get your job done, you got a problem. Okay. So I had zero problem with holding people accountable. But at the same time, I used to say, I want to hire grown adults. And what does that mean? That means that I'm hiring you for a particular role. You understand your role clearly. You tell me you have these skills to execute this role. I've checked your references. Now you're going to go execute the role, and I'm going to hold you accountable. Now, the manager's job that you work for, their job is to remove all the barriers possible so that you can go do your job. If you're having challenges, you're having issues, whatever's going on, their job is to remove barriers so you can go execute. And one of the things that when I was dealing with individual employees, was having professional pride in your work product. Personal pride is not a good thing, right? Egotistical, that's not what I'm talking about. But professional pride is a good thing, because you want people to care about their work output. I don't care what your trade is, what you're doing on behalf of a customer. You should care what the customer thinks of you as a person and of your work product. Right. And if you can connect that in a real way, people will execute at incredibly high levels, go above and beyond, because they know, that's an expectation in the company too.
Jim, I think I thought about this. I'm a steel sculptor too. I was doing all that. My wife a lot of times would say, well, why are you doing that? Like a certain detail or whatever it is, right? Whether it's simple or intricate, I do this. And I started to realize, these be some big shows and 100,000 people come and look at my work and whatever, and they all love it. And I told her, I was really the story. I had one guy who I knew about, never met him in this spot. We're talking like 20 years. I only heard about his name was Richie. Okay. He was my best friend, really good friend of his. He was a welder. Okay. Not just any welder. He's the kind of welder they flew around the world to weld stuff. That's how good he was. Okay. Upside down in a food safe, the whole deal with a mirror, and a guy could do anything, right? He's the guy. And one day I'm there in my garden in Navy Pier, and I got my sculptures, and this guy just told me, he goes, man, that's amazing. And he's talking about, that's really impressive. Then he asked me, he goes, you know a guy named Tom? And I looked at him and I go, are you Richie? Like that. He goes, yeah. I go, oh man. And he's like, tell me how great it is. I go, dude, you're like, And I'm looking at him going, but you can do it. I'm some hack, man. I'm an artist, but it's the judgment of your peers. When you talked about the professional performance, it's when I see someone who knows what they're doing and they compliment me on what I did, because it's, well, we do a similar thing. That's the praise I'm truly looking for. I love that 80,000 other people love my work, like pat me on the back, but not that one guy who operates at that world-class level says,
And look, I
that's
think,
what it's about.
particularly with younger employees, one of the things I used to tell them was, who do you look to that you want to emulate? Whatever your role is in the company, who's your model, right? Who do you want to emulate? I can think back as a young man, there were particular people in my life that were put in my life that I said, that person does this and this really well. I'm going to make those characteristics my own. And I think that's really critical for particularly young employees. And if you're an entrepreneur owner and going, okay, well, how do I develop them at a personal level and a professional level? Well, I need to give them the models in my company that I want them to emulate. Right. And so that's another way to help with this cultural identity, is to make sure that they're emulating the right people in your company.
Yep.
Quite frankly,
Yep.
Patrick Lencioni, I'm a huge fan. I mean, I got a bunch of books on my back shelf, but he talks about the dysfunctions of a team and an ideal team player, right? Those two books. And I think it's critical, you have to be willing at times as an entrepreneur to say, this particular employee is not working out. And in some cases, they may be highly skilled. They may be really valued, but you can look and go, I know this one's not working out. I need to make a change. So you need to plan, right? I need to plan to go, okay, I got to make a transition, because if it's culturally hurting your business, long-term, it's hurting your business.
Right. Right. And that stuff tends to snowball. Because it's like I always do if I get cancer in the tip of my pinky, I got to cut it off, because pretty soon it'll be the hand, the arm, the chest. You're done,
100%.
right? So and that's how that stuff grows. And
well, look, and I think the key here, when we're talking about culture and employees, and the key message that I'd like for your listeners to really take away from this is your employees are what build the value in your asset. Okay, is that if you are the asset, if you are the business, you are not transferable. You will simply one day lock the door, turn out the lights, and walk away with nothing.
I tell them, no one's buying you.
No one's buying you, 100%.
No one's buying you. You're going to leave. Just like I say about everybody, people leave. Everybody leaves.
And so that was one of the things that was really a pleasure, in this. And look, I'll say that over the 35 years and the 7 companies, I've had a lot of repeat employees. I've had a lot of people come back and work with me over and over and over again in those companies, because they knew how the business was going to be. They knew how Jim was going to operate the company. We didn't know how it was going to turn out. There was no guarantee for success, but they knew how the environment was going to be and what we were going to try to strive to build, and I think that's really the key, is that you need, if you want to have options, you got to have a mentality of, I'm building a transferable asset. And look, employees, I gotta break it to you. If you're an entrepreneur owner, they love you, but they will work for someone else.
Yes, they will.
And they will like you after the business transaction is done. They will remain your friends. They will still answer your phone calls. They will miss you, but they will continue in work, because they care about the company and they care about the customers, and they want it to continue on, beyond just you as the owner.
Yeah, and because of that, it means you did a great job.
100%.
You built the culture where they want to stay. They get it. I mean, I do have this saying. I tell them, everybody leaves. It might be in 5 years, might be in 50 years, might be in 5 days, might be at break time. Okay, the first break, they're going to leave, but people do that. And that's how we create this business that is self-sustaining. You create the culture so you just get the perfect example. Even the owner leaves and the people stay. because it's what they do. They thrive. They're, again, you built a winning atmosphere for them to stay in, regardless if you're at the helm or not.
Now, look, in the key, when we were evaluating potential buyers for the business, you're evaluating the best environment for the people that are in your care, right? Simon Sinek says that, right? These are people in your care. And so if you really care about them, you're thinking about, okay, what's life going to be like for them post-transaction? Can they still accomplish their hopes and dreams individually as employees? Is it going to be an environment they're going to enjoy working in? And can they continue to grow and develop? My dad used to say, don't sell the company too late. Leave some meat on the bone for
Yep.
the buyer, right? So they feel you have the ability to continue to progress. And those are the things you're thinking about. And so if the employee feels like you've done those things, it's going to be a successful transaction for both you, the owner who sells, as well as the people who remain behind to care for the.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway. It's interesting in the beginning, we all start a business, right? We try to get it off the launch pad, doing all that. So a lot of hard work. But what I have found now, and it's just time in the game, that the sooner we can start thinking about the things that you just spent the last almost hour talking about, right? Like the sooner you can think of those things, I know it's not easy in the very beginning because you're like trying to get something that you're trying to sell something, right? And make payroll and all that other neat little things. But I'm just saying the sooner you can, just like when I talk about the exit strategy, the sooner you can approach those things, the faster you can build and the more solid you're going to build, right? Because you're going to start building this culture. Because now, and this is why I want your kind of point of view on this, because you have built and exited 7 companies. Okay. So and you're not like 230 years old. Okay. So it's like there's,
59 this year, Richard.
We are the same age. We are exactly the same age. Okay. I have not built and exited 7 companies. I've only done 3, but I'm just saying that's a lot of work in a relatively short period of time, and to exit successfully it's another thing. Everyone leaves. Okay. Maybe not so well. My first one, I left with nothing left. Okay. I left with 0. My exit was just, please get out of the way before you get run over. So I just want people to understand, sometimes it seems overwhelming or impossible, and this is going to take me 25 years, but it doesn't.
It's not. And look, I just finished a YouTube series that's going to be out on the 21st, and it's basically the 7 stages to 100 million. Okay. I mean, that's for real because it's my own journey. It's my own practical journey. Nobody starts at 100 million. Everybody starts at 0. Okay. We all start at 0. And so once you exit what I refer to as just the startup or launch phase, you should really just be thinking about growing. And you have to go into some very practical steps around what are going to be the areas of the business that I'm going to focus my time and attention to growing, because that's where I have the most margin. That's where I have the most success executing. And how do I know that? It's because customers are happy with me when I do those things. And so you kind of can really, Vern Harnish has a great I got a book on my shelf, Scaling Up, right? He's got a great statement in that book. You make 80% of your margin from 20% of the things you do. He's right. He's right. Now, look, we all in the beginning phases of our business, we all do a lot of things because we're just trying to get to revenue and we're trying to figure it out. But you will get to the point of stability and you'll learn, okay, these are the areas of the business that I really want to focus on because my team is built to really execute these well. I make money doing these things. Customers are happy when we do these things. I want to do more of this thing. And so it becomes the linear growth, which means I've identified the thing. I'm going to grow in revenue. I'm also going to grow in cost in a linear way to get some growth, right? To get some revenue growth in the company. And then you go to the next phase, which is scale, which is nonlinear, right? Which is now I'm multiplying something and I'm not necessarily increasing cost associated with that revenue growth. Okay. But growth might take, the growth stage could take a year. It could take 2 years. It depends on your business, before you get to the place where you can go, okay, now I'm ready to scale. And what does that look like? I'll give you a concrete example. I had a young woman who came to me, and she was a hairdresser. She wanted to start a hair salon. And so we started talking about, what would startup look like? And we built the typical business plan, and she went and got her space, and she had, 6 or 7 booths that she rented out, and she made a little money, and she, all that was working fine. And it took her about, I don't know, 6 or 7 months, and she had a good stable, she was past the startup phase. And so now when we start talking about growth, and I'm like, okay, well, do you want to grow or do you want to scale? And so we start talking about, what does scale mean? Well, scale means that somebody would pay you a monthly membership fee, whether or not they were consuming your services or not. That's scale in your business, because sometimes things happen, right? People don't show up all the time. They don't get the same services, whatever. And she did. And over a period of 24 months, she was able to convert that, what would be traditional consumption for service, linear cost business, to now she's got a scaled business with 60% of her revenue coming from monthly membership. And so think about that. I have 60% of my revenue coming from recurring revenue, not point of service consumption. Well, that's a huge difference if she ever gets to the place where she wants to transfer the asset. She wants to sell the asset.
Right.
She may not. I mean, she's in her 20s. I mean, she's going to do this for a long time. She loves her business. But if something were to happen to her and she needed to sell it tomorrow, she could. Right? And so I think sometimes you have to think a little differently depending upon the business that you're in about, okay, well, how do I differentiate and start to think about my business from a scale perspective once you get past what I call the startup and growth phases, because look, we all know that as an entrepreneur, you got to get to a certain revenue on a monthly basis to feel like, okay, now I have comfort in cash flow and in profitability, and my team is settled, and all the kind of I'll call it the basics, right? The blocking and tackling that goes on. But once those things are done, now you can start to think about scale. My own experience was that it was typically around between year 3 and 4 is when you were starting to really thinking about scale.
So, Jim, and I'm glad you did this exactly the way I think of it, which is really great. But a thing you said that I want people to take away on these two things is growth and scale are two completely different things. Growth costs you money. It's expensive to grow. Scale is not just being duplicatable, but like you said, creating recurring revenue. Use the car wash model now.
Well,
it's all monthly.
Yeah, difference, the key to lock in on with growth is that I'm doing something, and it costs something to do that thing. So there's a linear relationship between the growing of revenue and the growing of expense, right? The growing of cost. And so growth, I look at entrepreneurs when they say, okay, I think I'm ready to grow. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you going to grow in? What's it cost? What's your available sources of capital, right? So how are you going to pay for growth, right? It may be debt. It may be just cash flow, whatever, cash in the bank, whatever it is. So those are the elements of growth. And so you're basically fueling growth through cash, because you're injecting cash into the business, because you're going to have costs associated with that. You get to a scale, to a size, right? Revenue grows, you get to a size when now you have greater profitability, greater capital availability. And now you're saying, okay, now I want to scale, which means I want to do something from a business model side that changes the game from linear cost growth with sales to sales without linear cost growth, cost growth, right? And so you're thinking about your business and saying, well, what does that mean? How would I do that, right? How would I do that to disconnect cost from revenue, so to speak? And there's the recurring revenue is obviously it's a popular model now. It wasn't popular 15 years ago, right? But it is very popular now. Everybody's got memberships for everything. But I think that's really the fundamental, goal, that you're looking for in the business.
Yeah, I agree. It's so good. I work with a lot of business owners, right? We're helping with their business. We do all these different things. And it's sometimes these really simple concepts like growth and scale that people haven't, either they haven't had the bandwidth, to sit down and actually think about it. They're just doing it and they merge the two together and they don't understand the outcome of doing that.
Well, it's also maybe a little bit of uncertainty around the actual blocking and tackling that you have to do to be successful in that phase, right? And so one of the things that I learned in my businesses was when I go to do growth, that was also because I had a team of people. It wasn't just me, right? I had a group of employees, I had a group of managers of employees. And so that was the time when I would begin formal annual strategic planning, annual plans, so that I could align my management team with growth. And what did that mean for them? So if I was going to say, I'm going to grow in these 3 areas of the business, well, what did that mean to each one of the functional areas of the business? How did we have to prepare, whether it was key employees, whether it was new processes that we didn't have in existence because we were going to go do something at greater volume, right? Whatever those things were. But I wanted the people responsible, people in the room, to have a say and to also buy in so that they understood why we were doing what we were doing. Because once they bought in, right, once we all said yes, now we're all on the hook. Now we're all accountable to each other. And that was kind of the key for me, was learning that when I entered that growth phase, I needed to create an annual plan. And look, I didn't have more than 6 or 7 goals, let's call them, for the year, because that's a lot.
It is.
Right? That's a lot to accomplish. So if I had 6 goals, I would put some goals in Q1, some in Q2, some in Q3, some in Q4, and then what were going to be the tactics that I was going to go execute to accomplish those goals, and how was I going to measure to know that I actually was achieving those goals. Very, very practical, right? A written plan, very practical, so that when we finished, everybody knew what we were working for.
Right.
And then we would meet monthly to go, how are we doing? How are we doing on our plan? Are we hitting it? Are we falling behind? Or where are we struggling?
Yeah, it goes back to knowing what success is.
Yeah.
What
And
does it
look,
look like
I think you said something really important, Richard, that, a lot of this stuff is out there. Okay. A lot of this stuff is out there. I think the challenge for entrepreneurs is, how do I get things in very practical, I got a limited amount of time. Right? I got a limited amount of time. How do I go distill this down, and when do I choose to do certain things? Right. And I think it's really important who you spend your time listening to. Right. And is it practical? Is it tactical? Can I take something away and go do something with it? Because like you said, you can spend your time is your most valuable asset.
It is. Absolutely. So yeah, it's really that decision-making process on things to apply. But as the owner, as the entrepreneur, should be in your wheelhouse. That's what I call focusing on your 5%. The 5% of the business only you can do. Like that's one of your things. Like no one else can tell you that, right? You've got to make these certain decisions.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think it's absolutely the owner's responsibility to decide, where are you going to grow? So like when you get past launch, right, and you think, okay, I'm stable, I'm in stability, now I want to grow. You own the choice of where you want your business to grow and how you want your business to grow. But you got to get the rest of the team on the boat. Otherwise, you're going to be trying to do it all by yourself, and it's not going to work. And that's why that is why we use the strategic planning approach that we did in our businesses, and it worked incredibly well. Worked really well.
I think what you're saying is that buy-in from the team. You can pull them along. Okay, you can drag them into your next thing. Never works. All you're going to have is disgruntled, angry people because it's new and it's uncomfortable, and you don't care. You just want to get what you want to get, and they're just a vehicle. Or like you said, you go and you get the buy-in. You talk about where you're going. We're all going to go together. right? It's important to, like I talked about earlier, everyone on the team has their hero point, right? We get that. We can't do this without you. And then you go that way. To me, that's really the way to win. And every business is going to grow to some point, right? It's kind of, in theory, it should be a continual thing. Doesn't mean you're going hockey stick, right? But like you kind of don't get to maintain.
Yeah,
You're going to
my
go
good
backwards or
friend, my
forward.
good friend says, if you're not growing, you're dying.
Yeah, that's what I
mean,
say. You
yeah.
know, I say every day I'm working out. We're dying every day. Every workout I'm going as hard as I can. You know, I used to be this and I'm not that anymore, but I'm going to be this. Okay. I'm a lot better than that guy. Okay. So there's always that stuff, you know, so you had that self competition, but this has been just awesome, Jim. We've hit some super practical stuff. And I love that. Okay. Cause I don't mind the high talk. I call it the high talk, you know, but when we can put it to boots on the ground, that's what matters, right? When we can take the concept and show how it works, like you just did for the last hour here, it's just amazing. I'm that way. I'm a results guy. That's me. I'm a results guy. Okay. We're going to get outcomes. That's what we do. And I love it. And you seem to be the same way. And I really like it. So give us some final thoughts. Kind of let's put a bow on this thing, wrap it up.
Yeah, look, I mean, I appreciate you giving me the time to talk. And I think we have a lot of similarities and alignment in the way we think about our companies. And I would just encourage your entrepreneurs to really think about your why. You know, if on video here, I have a picture behind me of my wife and I and my 6 children, and it reminds me every day, you know, it's been my wife for 35 years. And I say that because you got to have that internal fire of why you're doing what you're doing every day. All right. This thing that makes you get up out of bed and say, this is why I'm doing it. But you also need to ask yourself, what do you want in the end? And the end of all this, right? Well, what does the end of this journey look like for you? Are you literally just going to turn out the lights and walk away? That to me doesn't compute. You're spending your most important resource, your time, on something, time away from your families and friends to do this. Well, I encourage you to think about building something that is transferable. You know, if you come to dubos.me, there is I have free, you know, giveaways. Basically, you put your name in, your email address, and, you know, that I'll say the exit ready method is free. You can download it. It's a PDF.
Love it.
Yeah, you can download it as a PDF, and you can get these attributes and absorb them yourself. Or you can take a step for a very small dollar amount, and you will self-score yourself across the 15 attributes, and then I'll send you a report of areas of your business that if I was in your shoes, this is where I would prioritize and how I would execute against the business, you know. But I wanted to be able to give something of value to other entrepreneurs, you know, from my own journey. And so literally by just name and email address, you can download the 15 characteristics of an exit ready business and apply them, you know, for yourself. You know, so
that's awesome. That's awesome. One more time on the
website is my last name, DUBOS.me.
Got it. Perfect. And I know it's not out yet, but the 7 video series, that's coming out
so the
21st
YouTube
April,
video, the YouTube videos I published them, and one will come out on the 17th of this month, tomorrow, and then the other will come out on the 21st. But the full video comes out on the 21st, and it's the 7 stages to 100 million. It's basically my own personal journey through my companies that I've sold, and it just kind of goes through those stages as a business owner, and what are the differences? What are the differences in those stages, and what are the challenges that you need to be thinking about and preparing for as you go through those different stages in your companies?
I love it. So much good stuff, Jim. It has been spectacular, as I knew it would. That's why I didn't waste any time in the beginning. We got right into this because we got a lot of stuff to cover, and we covered a lot, and it's been fantastic. So everybody, I know you're taking away some great stuff. So good on you. And you know what? We'll see you on the next STS podcast. And don't forget, revenue feeds the ego, profit feeds the family. So if you want to see how I can show you at least $100,000 in hidden annual profits in less than 3 minutes, and not only show you where, But how to create that 100K in 6 months or less without additional advertising or marketing spend, guaranteed. Just go to sharpenthespiritcoaching.com. See how truly simple it is. That's sharpenthespiritcoaching.com. Do it now.